At first, they thought it was a robbery, just a broken door, missing jewelry, a frightened homeowner. But then someone noticed the doll. It hadn't been there before. It was sitting upright in the middle of the living room floor, its glass eyes fixed on the hallway, like it had seen everything. That night, it spoke. And what it said unraveled a decades-old nightmare no one was prepared to face. It was just past midnight when the security alarm tripped at 14, Sycamore Lane, and in a neighborhood where the loudest thing after 10 p.m. was usually the occasional bark of a restless golden retriever. The shriek of a triggered home security system was enough to rattle the windows and startle at least 4 neighbors out of bed. The responding officers arrived in under 7 minutes, flashlights cutting through the darkness, guns drawn. Voices calm but firm as they cleared the home room by room. What they found would, at first, seem routine. A back door kicked in, drawers ransacked, jewelry box overturned, laptop missing, and the homeowner, a 42-year-old woman named Dana Elkett, found tied to a chair in her upstairs hallway, breathing hard, gagged but conscious, her eyes wide and unfocused like someone who hadn't blinked in hours. Paramedics arrived seconds later. Dana was uninjured aside from bruised wrists and minor shock. She told police she'd been alone that evening, watching TV, and had fallen asleep on the couch when someone broke in. She heard men's voices, maybe 2 or 3, and then nothing until she woke up bound and blindfolded in the hallway. They hadn't hurt her, hadn't said a word, hadn't even looked at her, just tore the house apart, took what they wanted, and left, at least. That's what she thought. Detectives logged the crime as a burglary, possibly connected to a string of recent break-ins across the county. Nothing about it screamed unusual until Detective Sean McKinley reviewed the bodycam footage the next morning and paused at something oddly pristine in the chaos. An old porcelain doll, sitting upright in the middle of the living room rug, surrounded by shattered glass and overturned furniture, untouched, clean, deliberate. McKinley zoomed in, not because the doll itself was out of place, but because it seemed placed, not dropped or left behind, but centered like it was watching. And Dana, when asked about it, blinked and said it wasn't hers. She had no children, no nieces, no babysitting gigs, and had never seen it before in her life. At first the detectives chalked it up to a scare tactic, a calling card left by the intruders to rattle the homeowner. But a week passed, and then came the second call. It was Dana again, same voice, but trembling this time, saying she couldn't sleep, that the doll had moved, that it was now in the upstairs hallway sitting outside her bedroom door. McKinley, trying to stay grounded, asked if someone had maybe entered the house again, if the alarm had triggered or if there were signs of a second break-in. Dana swore nothing was touched, nothing missing, nothing out of place, except the doll. And that's when she said something that made the temperature in the room shift. She said it talked, not loudly, not in a child's voice, but in something raspy and slow like dry leaves being crumpled. She didn't hear words exactly, just a sound like syllables caught on the wind, and one word she did catch: basement. Now Dana's house didn't have a basement, at least not anymore. It had been sealed off after the flood 5 years prior. The access stairs were closed, the door nailed shut. The space beneath the house basically a crawl space full of mold, webs, and dust. But McKinley, now morbidly curious, requested a follow-up visit. The moment he stepped inside, Dana looked different. Sunken eyes, jumpy hands, the TV on but muted, and the doll now perched neatly on the mantel, eyes forward, dress spotless. And McKinley, not a superstitious man, found himself glancing at it twice every time he passed, like it might blink when he wasn't looking. They pulled the old city blueprints for the house and confirmed that the basement had originally included a subroom, a kind of storm cellar that was removed during a renovation in the late 90s. It was never documented as filled or demolished, just no longer there. And when they finally pried open the basement access, the smell hit them first, earthy, stale, something between mildew and rust, but layered beneath that was another odor, older and heavier, the kind of smell that settles deep in your throat and won't let go, like the past itself had been rotting down there in secret. They found a small wooden door at the far end of the crawl space, behind insulation and warped beams, a room that wasn't on any map or blueprint. Inside were old shelves, broken jars, and in the corner, a stained mattress and a rusted folding chair with leather straps. There were no lights, no writing on the walls, just the overwhelming sense that someone had been kept down there, not recently, but often. The walls were scratched, not clawed at in panic but scratched in lines, days maybe, counted. and stacked like a prisoner tracking time, and as Dana stood at the top of the stairs, eyes wide and silent, McKinley noticed her breathing had stopped. She was staring not at the room, but at the doll, which someone had placed on the floor at the top of the steps, facing inward, like it had watched them go down and was waiting for them to return. The DNA analysis came back a week later. Traces of blood in the mattress matched to a missing person from 2003, a girl named Elsie Mae Carter, 19 years old, last seen babysitting in the exact neighborhood where Dana now lived, and the last address on record for her employer, the previous owner of Dana's home. McKinley reopened the case, but records were thin. The homeowner back then had died in 2010. No next of kin, no public accusations, nothing ever proven, just rumors of strange noises, bad dreams, a cold patch in the back hallway, and now, suddenly, a doll with no fingerprints and no explanation was turning up at the center of everything. But it wasn't done. The next night Dana called again, this time in tears, saying she tried to throw the doll out, drove it 6 miles out of town and left it in a dumpster behind a gas station. Came home, locked all the doors, and fell asleep with the lights on. But when she woke up at 3:17 a.m., the doll was sitting at the foot of her bed. And this time, she said, it didn't whisper. It screamed. The scream didn't come from the doll's mouth, not exactly, but from somewhere deep in the house, like the walls themselves were echoing it. Dana said it rattled the windows, cracked a wine glass in the kitchen, and sent her bolting out of bed so fast she fell, cutting her knee on the hardwood floor. When McKinley arrived 20 minutes later, she was still on the front lawn in her robe, barefoot, clutching her phone and muttering something he couldn't make out until she repeated it louder. It's not a doll, she said, it's a memory. McKinley didn't know what to make of that. But when he entered the house, flashlight cutting across the quiet rooms, he noticed 2 things right away. First, the doll was gone. Second, the mattress from the basement had been dragged up the stairs and was now laid flat in the hallway outside Dana's bedroom. And no one, not Dana, not the neighbors, not even McKinley himself, heard anyone come in. Crime scene techs found nothing, no prints, no signs of forced entry, not even smudges on the walls or stairs, just the eerie placement of something that required strength, precision, and time, which meant someone had to have done it in complete silence, inside a locked house, with no trace of entry or exit, and still, Dana insisted it was the doll, said she saw it standing, yes, standing, at the end of the hallway just before the scream, and then it vanished, like it had never been there, and McKinley, rational as he tried to be, felt something gnawing at the edge of his disbelief, not because he believed the doll had moved on its own, but because he didn't know how else to explain what he saw next. On the mattress, written in a dark reddish-brown pigment that tested positive for blood, were 3 words scrawled across the center in jagged handwriting: "You found her." It wasn't a threat, not really, more like a statement, or worse, a confirmation, and it sent a ripple through the department, reopening cold case files that had been buried since before smartphones existed. Missing girls, runaways, housekeepers, babysitters, young women who vanished in the same 6-block radius around Sycamore Lane between 1999 and 2005. 5 of them in total, 1 confirmed dead, for still unaccounted for, and now 1 strange porcelain doll that seemed to appear at every new incident without explanation. Dana's mental health started to spiral. She stopped sleeping, refused to stay in the house alone. Her neighbors said they'd see her standing in her driveway at 3 a.m. whispering to no one, or walking the edge of her property like she was looking for something just out of view. And when she finally agreed to a psychiatric evaluation, the doctor recorded her sessions and flagged them for law enforcement. Because in one recording, Dana described, in vivid detail, the layout of a house that hadn't existed since 1998. A house that burned down during renovations just blocks from where she lived. The same house where 2 sisters went missing and were never found. She said she saw the sisters in her dreams, sitting cross-legged on the floor, one with a split lip and the other with a broken wrist, both holding hands with the doll between them, smiling but not really smiling, like their faces had been stretched into the shape of joy but none of it reached their eyes. Dana said they told her things, where they were kept, what they were made to do, and that the doll was the only thing keeping the bad man away, not protecting them exactly, but distracting him. That's when McKinley brought in a profiler, someone used to delusions, trauma patterns, dissociation. But after 2 hours with Dana, even he came out pale, saying that if she was making it all up, she deserved an Oscar, because her details were too specific, too textured, and carried an emotional weight he couldn't fake on his best day, and then came the break that changed everything. A retired officer named Hal Tripp, long since moved to Arizona, called in after hearing about the case on a local podcast, said he'd responded to a domestic disturbance in that same neighborhood back in 2001. A woman claiming her ex-husband had broken in and was trying to bury something in the crawlspace. The report never went anywhere because she recanted a day later, moved out a month after that. But Hal remembered something strange. The man she accused wasn't her ex-husband. Not really. He was her landlord, and he lived 2 doors down. And when Hal checked the property records, he found the name, David Elkett, Dana's uncle. McKinley's jaw locked. Dana had never mentioned any family nearby, had always insisted she bought the house from a seller she didn't know. But when questioned again, she hesitated, then admitted she inherited the home through a legal trust after her uncle died. She'd never met him, never wanted to, said her mother had warned her about him growing up, said he had dark rooms in his house that no one was allowed to open, and she thought that was just a figure of speech. It wasn't. When they excavated the crawlspace under the house David Elkett lived in until his death, they found 2 things. 1, a rusted tin box filled with Polaroids of girls in various states of injury, fear, and silence, and 2, a porcelain doll, identical to the one found in Dana's house, pristine, untouched, and missing its mouth. No one understood what that meant until the lab results came back and confirmed what Dana had said during one of her lucid episodes. The dolls had been modified, not in a factory, but by hand. Tiny threads of hair from each girl were embedded in the dolls' heads, like some kind of binding, and inside the chest cavity of the second doll, they found a voice box, the old kind, the type that activates when you tilt the doll or pull a string. But this one was rigged differently. It didn't play nursery rhymes or lullabies. It played whispers. Not mechanical ones, recorded ones. 5 voices, all female, and one of them matched the voice-print of Elsie Mae Carter. The audio was grainy, full of static and background noise, but one sentence came through clearly: "We see everything now." The police sealed the room, logged the doll, and tried to keep it quiet, but Dana wasn't done unraveling. She screamed for days, said they were still talking, not the dolls. But the girls said they didn't want justice, didn't care about trials or headlines or prison. They wanted to be remembered, not as victims but as proof that evil doesn't always wear a mask or hide in shadows. Sometimes it signs a lease and smiles at your kids. Sometimes it hands you a doll and tells you it's just decoration. And then one day, Dana vanished. Her car was still in the garage, her phone left on the kitchen table. No signs of struggle, no note, just the doll. Now seated at the dining table, arms folded in its lap, head tilted slightly toward the window as if watching for someone. And on the wall, carved in small, perfect letters with something sharp, was one final phrase: "Bring her home." The note on the wall, "Bring her home," wasn't written in ink or pencil. The lab confirmed it was etched into the drywall with a shard of glass, which investigators later found on the floor under the table. Not just any glass, but the beveled corner of a shattered photo frame, and the picture inside, once pieced back together, showed Dana at age 9, sitting on a picnic blanket with a woman no one could identify and a doll that looked all too familiar resting on her lap. And suddenly McKinley realized this wasn't about a haunting or revenge. It was about roots, about something that had been planted decades ago and was only now beginning to bloom. So they searched the house again. Every room, every pipe, every crawl space. And in the attic, behind insulation that had turned gray with age, they found a shoebox, wrapped in duct tape, containing a single cassette tape labeled "Do Not Play," and they played it. The voice was Dana's, but not the Dana they knew. This version was childlike, hesitant, and in the background were muffled sobs and what sounded like dripping water, and Dana was speaking slowly, as if reciting from memory. She said she'd lived there before, not in this house, but in the basement below, the one no one knew existed. Said she was taken from her family as a child and raised by a man who said he was her uncle. But he never let her go outside, never let her talk to anyone, just kept her with the dolls, said they were her sisters, and if she loved them, she'd never leave. And when the real Dana moved into the house years later, the memories had stayed, tucked deep inside her like bruises she couldn't explain. And the doll, if you listened close enough, was trying to remind her of who she really was. That night McKinley didn't sleep. He replayed the tape over and over until he heard something he hadn't caught the first time. For Knox, slow and deliberate, not part of the recording, but coming from the tape player itself, as if someone were knocking from inside the machine. And when he looked up, the lights in his kitchen flickered, his phone buzzed, and a new voicemail appeared from an unknown number. He played it, but all he heard was breathing, and the unmistakable sound of a music box winding down. The next day, the case was pulled from Kinley's hands, deemed too unstable, too fringe, and reassigned to cold case management where it was quietly buried under layers of bureaucracy. But McKinley couldn't let it go, especially after Dana's car was found 3 weeks later on a mountain trail 40 miles north of the city. Unlocked, keys in the ignition, driver's seat empty, and in the back, buckled neatly into a child's car seat, was the doll. No prints, no tracks, no Dana, and no explanation for how the doll had gotten there. But the strange thing, the truly strange thing, was the security footage from a gas station 10 miles south of the trailhead, timestamped 3 hours before the car was discovered. It showed Dana at the pump, filling her tank, alone, calm, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, and as she turned toward the camera, her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like she was sleepwalking or already halfway gone, and in her passenger seat, visible for just a few seconds before the screen cut to black, was a figure, a girl, no older than 10, with tangled hair and a porcelain white face. Not a doll, not a toy, but a child no one could identify. And when authorities enhanced the footage frame by frame, they realized something chilling: the girl didn't blink. From there, the sightings escalated. A couple in Tennessee claimed they found a porcelain doll sitting on their porch one morning, holding a note that read, "Do you remember us?" A teacher in Oregon received an anonymous package filled with old photos of her childhood friends, each with their eyes scratched out and one word scrawled across the back, "Almost." And a podcast host investigating the case suddenly disappeared after releasing an episode titled "The Doll Knows," leaving behind a single audio file of static and faint whispers that, when reversed, allegedly repeats the phrase "she's not finished." Then came the final twist. 6 months after Dana's disappearance, a girl named Hallie Monroe went missing in rural Pennsylvania. The investigation hit a wall until her younger sister, just 7 years old, said something odd during questioning. She told detectives Hallie had been having dreams, the kind where she'd wake up screaming, saying someone was in her room but only ever pointed to the doll on her shelf, said the doll kept saying, "Help her find the last one." The last one. McKinley, who'd since left the force and become obsessed with the case, believed this wasn't just a haunting or a string of coincidences. It was a chain, and Dana wasn't the first or the last link. He tracked down every property owned by David Elkett, cross-referenced every reported missing girl within 10 miles of each, and came up with a terrifying pattern. Each site had been lived in by a single woman within 5 years of the last reported incident, and each woman had reported strange events, involving children, whispers, or dolls before vanishing completely. The worst part? They were all connected by blood. Each woman, Dana included, was distantly related to David Elkett through foster networks, second marriages, or sealed adoption records, like he had been building something, generation after generation, leaving behind pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to finish assembling. Until now. Because 3 nights ago, in a town Kinley had never even heard of, a baby monitor recorded a voice in the middle of the night, whispering to a newborn baby in a dark nursery. The parents rushed in, found the baby sleeping peacefully, but the room ice cold, and sitting in the rocking chair across from the crib was the doll. Only this time, her eyes were open. If this story shocked you, subscribe for more true crime stories that sound unbelievable but are 100% true.